Hello everyone, here is my recap for my Hardcore Necromancer, especially the Thorns Minion Necromancer. I think it's a huge success that we managed to clear pretty much every content in Season 4, including those tormented bosses. And we were able to carry the 4-man party, Lord Zier, in like 10 seconds. And also, we successfully pushed to pit level 134, which ranked as number 1 in the Hardcore Necromancers in the max roll pit push leaderboard. This will be a long video. Feel free to use the timestamps below. And here you can see my gears. Most of my gears are quite perfectly masterworked, so I think there is some room for improvement, but not too much. So here is a short summary of how I got to pit 134. So after I got my perfect masterworking of my gear, I started to push with the 1 GA razor plate, and I started with my tanky defensive oriented build, and I was able to clear pit level 128. If you ever watch my full runs when I use the full tanky build, you will notice that it's very safe for hardcore, because we have hardened bones on our amulet, and also because we have bone storm up all the time, so you can see our health bar never moves, and pretty much always we have full barrier. And also we have another layer of protection, which is the protecting the bubble aspect. So whenever the bubble pops, we can just scroll out, so it's really safe. With the same 1 GA razor plate setup, I moved the blighted aspect to the amulet for pushing higher, and also with this setup, I had to remove my bubble aspect and put on the intercom. And this enabled the build to go to pit level 130. And late in the season, I was able to acquire a 4 GA razor plate. This moved my tanky shadow build to clear pit 131, and eventually my pushing build without the protecting aspect to pit 134. And with the same setup, I tried to clear pit 135, and I was able to get to the boss with about like 5 minutes and 30 seconds, which means that if we have very good RNG with boss spawns, we could actually clear 135, but I was unlucky, so I didn't get the right boss. And here you can see in another instance, I was just short, 1 minute short. So I think with some good RNG, this build can clear pit 135. And of course, after we tried to go full DPS, we reach our limit. So now let's talk about why Thorns Minion build is the best necro build for hardcore. The first point is that Thorns' basic mechanism. So when monsters inflict direct damage to their minions, they receive Thorns damage with the base value equal to your minion's Thorns value from the character sheet. So in your endgame, before you even reach level 100, if you have a razor plate, 20k Thorns is easily reachable. So each Thorn proc will have a 20k base damage. Compare this to your spells, let's say with the 100% weapon damage, then that'll be somewhere in between like 3k to 4k damage. So you can see one Thorn proc has much higher base damage than your normal attacks, even with like 100% weapon damage. And in an endgame scenario, you can reach about like 40 to 45k base thorns. And also you have minion inheritance thorns increase, so that will put, let's say, about 130% more thorns for your warriors, which means that your warriors can have a base thorn value about 100k. So that's the first strong point for thorns. And the second point is that Minion Thorns can fully enjoy most minion related multipliers. The only thing they don't get is overpower and crit. So our main multipliers for Thorns damage will be Cult Leader 2.5x, the Warrior Mastery, so it's up to 3.55x, and Blighted Aspect 2.2x on a regular offensive piece. And of course, Hellbent Commander, it can be up to 2.5x. And we have some other great aspects such as Reanimations 1.4x and Flesh Eater 1.4x, etc. The third strong point of Thorns minion build is its efficiency with affixes. As we know that Thorns cannot critically strike in most cases, this means we don't need crit chance or crit damage from our gear. Since the affix choices are all about opportunity cost, we now free up spaces to include life on every piece of our gear and intelligence on most of our pieces. This is very important for hardcore. When it comes to temper, we can fully use every temper to boost our damage and EHP. For example, a Shadow Minion build or other Necro builds, they have a hard time taking advantage of utility temper because the Corpse Tendril or Decrepify size or CC duration, they don't directly increase your DPS or EHP. But for Thorns build, we can roll Thorns Inheritance temper on our utility pieces. This means that we can have another 2 to 3x multiplier to our base Thorns, which is really strong. The fourth strong point for Thorns build is its smooth transition from leveling to endgame. As we know that a pure minion build is already S tier for leveling, and the Minion Thorns build starts as a pure minion build, and once you get a Razor Plate, just put it on, and you seamlessly transition into the Thorns build. And you can use this pure minion version before you have 100% total minion attack speed. And once you get 100% total minion attack speed without using Cleanse Edict, you can transition into the Pit Pushing Shadow version. And the transition is very smooth. And even with the pure minion version, you can speed farm Pit level 90 to level 100 with no problem. The fifth strong point for a Thorns build is its great synergy between Thorns and tankiness. In hardcore mode, we generally build a lot of tankiness, and this works well with the playstyle of Thorns build. Using a shield is the easiest first step towards building a tanky character. For normal build, this instantly reduces 10% of your damage, but for Thorns build, as the base Thorns value has nothing to do with the weapon damage, using a shield would not reduce your base damage. In fact, it increases the base damage because you can have a Thorns Inheritance temper from the shield. So this is extremely helpful for hardcore players. So now let's discuss another frequently asked question, which is Golem Thorns versus Warrior Thorns. As you can see here, I'm playing with a Golem Thorns variant with pretty unoptimized gear, and I'm able to do level 130 pit. Although I didn't clear the whole thing, that's because I got a pretty bad boss, and in this build my gear is not optimized only with a 1 GA razor plate. This is what I played after I ripped my Warrior Thorns Necromancer. So every piece is upgraded to level 12, but without creating twice at the things I wanted. So my conclusion for the build would be both Golem and Warrior Thorns can have comparable pushing potential. The Warrior focused version will be a little bit tankier. The Golem version is better for mob and elite clear. The Warrior version could be better for certain bosses that have massive AoE. To make the Golem version work, we need to first have a nice razor plate, of course, and temper for the Golem Thorn inheritance from our utility pieces. And also we want to stack armor, which means that we want to temper armor percentage on all our defensive pieces if possible. And also we'll use a Juggernaut aspect. In this way we can have super high armor. This in combination with some Golem armor nodes in Paragon will give our Golem huge base armor, and when we taunt with the Golem, 70% of its armor can be converted into thorns. So per my calculation, we can get up to 200k Golem Thorns. This means with all the minion related multipliers, we can have billions of Thorns damage from the Golem proc. Now let's talk about Thorns build going into Season 5 for Hardcore Necromancers. I would call it from niche to mainstream. As you can see, more and more people are realizing that a Thorns minion build is very good for Hardcore Necromancers, arguably the best build for Hardcore. Let's first break down the changes to see if it remains to be the best build into Season 5. So the main change to all Necromancers would be the heavy nerf to the Blighted aspect from 120% to 60 or 50%. This means that we will use Great Feast to replace the Blighted aspect. It's overall a big nerf. So assuming our Blighted aspect to have 80% coverage and the Great Feast would have 100% coverage, then that's already a 20% damage nerf. And also we need to solve the essence regen problem when we use the Great Feast. The solution to this will be to use Decompose or to roll one essence regen from our gear affixes. And also, because damage to close is nerfed mainly due to the barbs, we need to replace the damage to close temper with damage to cursed or damage while fortified. So this will represent another 10 to 20% damage loss depending on your rolls. The third part will be Hellbent Commander. It used to be 15% per level, now it becomes 10% per level, but you don't need to stay close to our minions, because a Thorns Necromancer pretty much always stay close to our minions. Let's assume we have +6 Hellbent Commander on our amulet, then the nerf will be a 2.35x to 1.9x, and if we assume 90% coverage in Season 4 and 100% coverage in Season 5, then it will be about a 10% nerf. And also we have a slight buff from Razor Plate, unique effect. So it's up from a max of 150 crit to 200% crit. So it's a slight buff, just a couple percentage depending on your roll. Let's call it a 3% buff. A major buff to the Thorns Necromancer will be the rank to spiked armor from our defensive tempers. So now we can roll this passive on every defensive pieces. So this can increase our base thorns considerably, around like 10k. And consequently, we will have less life. So this will be like 15-20% buff on our damage, depending on your roll on your razor plate, depending on like how much thorns you already have. But there's a heavy caveat. This will be very hard to roll because you have to roll it to +2, and this will probably break some items. And of course, we have a new addition of an aspect that when you channel and 3 seconds after you channel, you will have about 11k thorns. This is a nice buff and nice addition, which will help us in our, at least very significant in our early game. Before you even acquire a razor plate, you can have very high thorns. And so if we combine this aspect with the rank to spiked armor, they can give you a total about 20k thorns. So this is about like 50% increase of our total thorn value. But at the same time, we'll lose the Blood Getters 20% damage. And also, we have a buff to the Blood Begets Blood legendary node. It's up from 30% X to 50% X. So assuming 60% coverage of the full benefit, it will represent about 10% buff. And of course, we have our main stat buff. Assuming we have 1600 int in our endgame build, then that will be about 15% buff to our damage. So overall, after I combine all those calculations, you'll see that our damage is about the same as our Thorns Necromancers in Season 4. And we save 2 affixes for attack speed because now we use Cleanse Edict, and we lost 2 life tempers and 1 armor percentage tempers because we need to roll those into spiked armor. So overall, I think we are getting a very slight buff comparing to other minion builds. I think Thorns build is in a good spot. Of course, in Season 5, Bone Spirit will be the strongest build for Necromancers. However, this build is extremely squishy, and in an endgame scenario, it's very tight on your gear affixes and temper rolls. So if you would like to go for it, I would still recommend you going for a Minion Thorns Necromancer build first, before you have the right gear to go Bone Spirit. So I'll briefly go over the 2 builds I'm putting up here. So first one is the mixed Minion Thorns build. So for this build, let's look at the items. On the helm, we have Warrior Mastery and Life and Intelligence. And on every piece, on every utility piece, we roll Minion Inherited Thorns. And for the defensive temper, we want Spiked Armor. And here I'm using the Embaumer to have Blood Orbs, because in Season 5, Blood Orbs are actually very important. In the Blood Begets Blood board, as you can see here, this legendary node will be 50% in Season 5. So it's very important to have the Blood Orbs. And for the chest, it's Razor Plate. And for the gloves, here I'm having Intelligence, Max Life, and Mage Mastery. And for the offensive temper, we go for damage to curse enemies. And
here I'm having the aspect to increase the number of warrior and mages. For the pants, I'm having intelligence, max life, and mage mastery, and also temper for minion inherited thorns and spiked armor, and we put a shielding storm here. For the boots, the same as season 4, we have warrior mastery, movement speed, life, and minion inheritance thorns, and movement speed as those two tempers. And here we are putting on this new aspect to increase our thorns while we're channeling and for 3 seconds afterwards. For the weapon, we're going for intelligence, maximum life, vulnerable damage, minion attack speed, and damage to cursed enemies. And I'm putting Bone Storm, Osseous Scale aspect here to increase the duration of the Bone Storm. Let's go for the shield. We put intelligence, life, damage reduction, minion inherited thorns, and spike armor. And here I'm having the curse aura, so we don't need to have the curse on our skill bar, which leaves some space to put the decompose there. And for the first ring, intelligence, life, attack speed, damage to curse, and ultimate cooldown reduction, and reanimation aspect. The second ring, intelligence, life, attack speed, damage to cursed, and golem active cooldown or your ultimate cooldown. I think golem active cooldown here is better. We will have like a balanced build. And for the amulet, Hellbent Commander, and try to level it up to highest as you can. The higher the better. And ideally we want a Death Embrace, and the third can be cooldown reduction or intelligence %, whatever benefits you. And we temper for minion inheritance of thorns and damage to cursed. And here we put the hardened bones on our amulet. As for the skills, we want to use Decompose, Golem, Corpse Tendril, Raise Skeleton, Bone Storm, and Blood Mist. And for the Book of Dead, we go Reaper upgrade 1 to reduce cooldowns, and we have Shadow Mage upgrade 1 to increase damage, our overall damage, and we have Bone Golem upgrade 1 to shed more corpses. So in this build, because we have Corpse Tendril that we can bring everyone together, and we can use Decompose, and the explosion from Decompose will make them all vulnerable. So we have a good source of vulnerability. So we can have corpses from our golem. We don't need to use Bone Golem upgrade 2. So the rotation goes, we can throw our golem into the pack, and Corpse Tendril bring everything together and use our Bone Storm and use our Decompose, and everything should die pretty fast when they attack our minions. And as for the skill tree, it's pretty standard, nothing to talk about specifically. I include everything in the link. And the Paragon is also a very standard 7-board Paragon for minion build. And the only thing to note is that we put Blood Begets Blood in as the last board because we want this legendary node. So I think this build will be pretty strong and will transition very smoothly. Even before you get Razor Plate, you can use the Thorns from the aspect to try to farm your Razor Plate. Now let me briefly go over my Season 5 Thorns build for the golems. For the helm, we'll use Shaco. So here the stats are not updated yet, but we know that for Season 5, Shaco is great buff. We have 20% base cooldown reduction, so when we master it twice, crit it twice, and masterwork to level 12, we'll have about 39 cooldown reduction, which is huge, and also it rolls armor, which is good for Thorns build, specifically for Golem Thorns build. And our chest will be razor plate, and for our gloves we'll have intelligence, life, and armor, and we temper Golem Inheritance of Thorns and Golem damage. And here in this build particularly, I'm not using a curse, which means that I can have Bone Prison, Golem, Corpse Tendril, Raised Skeleton, Bone Storm, and Blood Mist on my skill bar. So here I'm using Plunging Darkness to have a Blight 20% damage buff to the monsters trapped in our Bone Prison. And for our pants, we have Intelligence, Life, Armor, and Golem Inheritance of Thorns and Spike Armor. And for our boots, we have a Skeletal Warrior Mastery. I have it here, although we are using a Golem oriented build because we want our Skeletal Warriors to be tanky enough to survive long, so we have the benefit of Cleanse Edict. So here I still choose to have this Warrior Mastery. And we will have 1 affix of essence per second, which can sustain us from the essence drain from the Great Feast. And also we temper for Golem Inheritance of Thorns and movement speed. And here I'm using the Blood Getter aspect. And for the pants, we use Shielding Storm. And for the weapon, we'll go for Int, Max Life, and Vulnerable Damage, and temper for Minion attack speed and Golem damage. And I'm using Osseous Scale here to increase the coverage of our Bone Storm. And for a shield, I'm putting Hardened Bones on my shield, and we want damage reduction, Int, and Max Life. You can also roll armor here. It's not that important. And we have Golem Inheritance of Thorns and Spiked Armor as our tempers. And here for the ring, it's very interesting that we will use Ring of Them Down because this ring has been updated to have a mastery of Golem and Mage and Warrior. Although it's not updated yet, but the new ring will have Intelligence, Damage, Minion attack speed, and +1 to all the masteries. And if we have a greater affix of this mastery, and if we crit it once and upgrade the ring to 12, we should have +3 to our mastery, which is huge for a Golem based build, because in a Golem build, we lose when we use the Razor Plate, we don't have the Golem mastery from our chest. So this +3 alone is about a 40% damage to our Golem. So we use the Ring of Mendel purely for the Golem mastery. So for the second ring, we will have Intelligence, Max Life, Attack Speed, and Golem damage and Golem active cooldown reduction. And we'll put Great Feast here. And for the amulet, we'll have Hellbent Commander, and you will try to have, as high ranks as possible. And ideally, we'll have Death Embrace and Total Armor. And we temper for Golem Inherit Thorns and Golem damage. And here I'm putting Reanimation here for 60% more damage. And for Book of Dead, I'm using Reaper Upgrade 1 to reduce our Bone Storm cooldown. And Shadow Mage Upgrade 1 to have 9% total multiplicative damage. And I'm using Bone Golem Upgrade 1 to shed 5 corpses. So the rotation goes, you just throw your Bone Golem into the pack, and you Corpse Tendril, you raise Skeleton to have the buff, and when everything is brought together, you cast a Bone Prison, and of course you can cast Bone Storm and Blood Mist in to have your barrier build up, and you cast your Bone Golem taunt again to kill everybody. And that's how easy the rotation is. And if we look into the skill tree, it's pretty standard. I don't think I need to talk much about that. And there will be several flexible points. For example, here I'm having Death Defense because it increased the armor of our minions, which can, for our Golem, will be equivalent to its Thorns value, right? That's why I'm having 3 points here, but I mean, it's not that important because the value is pretty low. And because this build, I don't use curse, so we don't level up amplified damage. And for the Paragon, it's a pretty standard 7-board Paragon.
And I'll have everything linked below in the description so you can have something to refer to. Hope I will see a lot of people running Thorns Minion in Hardcore, and I think it will be fun. And of course, I'm pretty sure people will discover something new that make this build even more powerful. So see you around, guys. Have a nice day.